Hey, I'm Blair Best, and tonight on The Story, we begin outside Portland City Hall, where a handful of counselors are preparing their latest move to push back against the Trump administration's plan of deploying National Guard troops to the ICE building on the South Waterfront. What the counselors' Protect Portland initiative would do. It's our big story tonight. But before we get to that, let's take a live look at the ICE building in South Portland tonight. There have been people dancing in costumes. Our crew on the ground tells us some women just finished up a bridge game they were playing on the sidewalk while eating pizza. Federal agents recently came out with a ladder, we're told, not sure what for, while Portland police officers monitor from a distance. We'll keep an eye on things. Wednesday night, 4 Portland City Councilors will introduce the Protect Portland initiative. It's a resolution that will, quote, act as a safeguard for Portlanders targeted by the Trump administration's aggressive federal overreach. It's the latest attempt by Portland City Council to push back against the Trump administration's plan to deploy National Guard troops to federal buildings in Portland, specifically that ICE building. Now, this resolution is modeled off the Protect Chicago executive order, which Chicago's mayor signed in late August. That one aims to promote the well-being of communities and to, quote, safeguard their rights in response to threats arising from federal actions and inactions. Today, I talked with one of the counselors behind Portland's version of that idea, Council President Ilana Perdolgini.
A lot of counselors have been looking at different ways that we can meet this moment for our community and make sure that we are responding to the continuous attacks from the Trump administration. Well, right now we have a federal government that seems hell-bent on singling Portland out to advance their agenda. We see that in increased immigration enforcement. We see that in the threats of National Guard coming into our city. We see that in the very aggressive stance that federal agents have been taking with protesters at the ICE facility. Portland, of course, has had folks protesting that ICE facility for years, and it's only in more recent months that we've seen that very aggressive stance by federal agents.
All right, here's the nitty-gritty of what the Protect Portland initiative would do. It would find out how the federal government is enforcing its policies and if they are surveilling Portlanders. Create a rapid response plan for immigration raids, including extending sanctuary policies to city contractors. New guidelines for the Portland Police Bureau to strengthen its separation from federal immigration enforcement. Because Oregon is a sanctuary state, local law enforcement cannot assist federal immigration efforts. Now, another provision is making a process for investigating potential crimes by impersonators of ICE agents. All new city contractors must go through training on city sanctuary policies and prohibit them from sharing people's personal data with federal agents. And it would create a Protect Portland information hub with updates, resources, and outreach surrounding the impacts of federal immigration activity.
There's a lot of work that counselors are doing right now to ensure we can meet this moment. This is a long game. We don't expect the Trump administration to turn their attention away from Portland for a while here.
The Protect Portland initiative could come with a price tag. Things like staff training and the information hub will cost money to implement, though it's unclear how much. Now, you'll hear the council president say the administration. In this case, she means the mayor's office.
So resolutions don't have budget authority attached to them. The administration has looked at this, hasn't pushed back on any of the pieces that are currently in there.
Now, many Portlanders have already submitted written testimony on this idea, the majority supporting the resolution, but some want to see some changes made. One person wants a minimum of 10 Portland police officers outside the ICE building every day. Another wants to know exactly how much this resolution will cost. Andy Smith, who lives near the ICE building, wrote in part, "Our neighborhood has already been disrupted by the additional federal presence. We are kept awake by circling Blackhawks, for example. It is my belief that the National Guard would be highly disruptive and potentially even dangerous to the health of the South Waterfront and Johns Landing, and perhaps to the city as a whole." But some people are against this resolution. Jennifer Robinson wrote in her testimony in part, "I do not support the turncoat policymaking coming from this dais. Not all embrace sanctuary policies. I welcome the federal government assistance and deployment of federal agencies. The mayor is outspoken in not participating. The federal government is not minimizing or ignoring real problems like local officials. The gaslighting needs to stop.
And I think any Portlander could create a whole list of programs that we could use federal support on. Let's get federal support creating more affordable housing. Let's get federal support to make sure that we can complete our transportation projects. What we haven't asked for is federal support in the form of National Guard at the ICE building, which is a single building within our city, to add more enforcement to a location where the federal government is already trying to incite a narrative that they want that doesn't actually exist in Portland right now.
City Council Vice President Tiffany Koyama Lane, a co-sponsor of the resolution, told us today, "I want to remind us all that while we work hard to protect Portland in every way possible, we must not lose sight of what's at stake here. We are fighting to defend democracy for ourselves, our entire state, and our entire country." Okay, again, the Protect Portland initiative will be introduced to the full City Council tomorrow. A vote could happen then on whether or not to approve it. Portal-Guinea believes it has the support to pass. We'll keep an eye on it. But first, we want to hear from you. What do you think about this resolution? Will it make a difference? Email us at thestory@kgw.com or call and leave us a voicemail, 503-226-5090. Now, moves by the city like that initiative bring up an interesting argument. At its core, the idea is basically that the city is not doing enough to help protect the area around the federal ICE building and is sort of poking the bear, if you will, of the federal government with policies that some argue hamper the feds from doing their job. Judge Ryan Nelson raised that argument last week, talking about the city of Portland issuing a land use violation against the feds at the ICE building, saying they violated their permit more than 24 times for allegedly detaining people overnight, holding them for more than 12 hours, and boarding up windows.
I'm just perplexed, and I think Judge Beatty may have referenced this. So they reopen the building, they board the windows for protection. And what does the city of Portland do? They issue a zoning violation. Are you defending issuing a zoning violation, telling them to take off the boards that were put up to respond to protesters? Do you think that that was maybe ill-advised?
Okay, as far as where that violation process stands, it's currently in administrative review, and there's no timeline on when a decision could be made to determine what happens next. But I asked Council President Ilana Portal-Guinea about all this today, particularly about the ICE building's boarded windows and if the city has done enough to help protect the building and how that may have played into the president's decision to try and send troops here.
We haven't seen that type of vandalism at the ICE facility for a number of months now. And frankly, the president wasn't threatening this type of enforcement when that was happening. So I don't think these two things are related at all.
Meanwhile, a federal judge in Portland scheduled a phone conference for tomorrow on whether to extend her order temporarily blocking the deployment of the National Guard for another 2 weeks. The hearing had been set for Friday, but now has been moved up. Kyle Boshi is closely monitoring all the legal developments in this case. So Kyle, why the change?
Basically, it was moved up because of scheduling issues. The phone conference is set for tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Judge Karen Emmerich is considering whether to extend her temporary restraining order blocking the Trump administration's deployment of the Oregon National Guard for another 2 weeks.
And still no decision from the Ninth Circuit?
Still no decision. We're still waiting for that ruling from the Ninth Circuit. It really could come at any time. The appellate court is considering whether to overturn Judge Emmerich's order. One thing to keep in mind here, there was a case in California involving a similar temporary restraining order blocking the deployment of the National Guard. In that case, it took the Ninth Circuit just 2 days to issue an order reversing the lower court.
And Kyle, we found out today that National Guard troops from Oregon are being sent to Texas. Is that related to any of this? And what do we know about their mission?
The Oregon Military Department said today that 60 soldiers are being deployed in support of security operations at the southern border, providing critical logistics support, including vehicle recovery, maintenance, refueling, and parts distribution.
Okay, Kyle Boshi staying on top of things for us tonight. Kyle, thank you. Well, this past weekend, people bared it all to protest President Trump's plan to send the National Guard to Portland. They joined in an emergency naked bike ride in the rain. It's usually an annual event held in the summer, meant to be a protest against fossil fuels, but this one brought out hundreds of people who rode through downtown Portland and gathered at the ICE building. The event even got the attention of U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson. In a news conference today about the ongoing government shutdown, he answered a question about federal officers reportedly getting rough with people they're arresting and whether Congress should implement more oversight.
To demand oversight on federal law enforcement? Well, I've not seen them cross the line yet, and that we have committees of jurisdiction who have that responsibility, but it's not risen to that level. What I've seen is the abuse of law enforcement by radical leftist activists. Most recently, the most threatening thing I've seen yet was the naked bicyclers in Portland who were protesting ICE down there. I mean, it's getting really ugly.
Okay, well, it seems like it was a bit of tongue-in-cheek response, no pun intended, given the smirks that you're about to see from the people standing behind him. Speaker Johnson went on to say the protesters are the ones targeting federal officers.
They have attacked, physically assaulted officers. People have been arrested, okay? This is serious business. And ICE and the valiant, brave, patriotic Americans who step up to serve in these dangerous law enforcement positions deserve our respect and our support.
All right, now let's get to some of your thoughts on our big story from last night. We talked about the differences between journalists and social media influencers, especially when it comes to media coverage of the ICE building in Portland. It's an open secret that conservative voices on social media are getting special access to the building, both inside and on the roof, and access to federal officials themselves. Case in point, Secretary Kristi Noem's visit last week. We had no idea about it until someone with a conservative account on social media made a video saying he was flying to Portland to meet up with the DHS secretary here. We had a good discussion last night. We heard the conservative side of things from radio host Lars Larson, and then we had esteemed journalism professor Al Tompkins join the show live. If you missed our segment last night, you can find it on the KGW YouTube page anytime. Okay, the vast majority of your comments to us sounded like this one from Chris.
I really, really appreciate this type of reporting. It's educational, it's informative, and I think it is exactly what we need to be able to teach people how to think between influencers and journalism and what's important. And I just think you're hitting, you're hitting the mark. You are doing good reporting, and please keep it up because we need this.
Cynthia wrote in saying, your story discussing the difference between journalists versus influencers was well put by you. Your obligation to be balanced is shown often. Trump's roundtable of blowhards investigating the crime of flag burning was disturbing. Are we revisiting Vietnam? You journalists belong on the ICE roof too. Keep looking into this.
Thank you for having Mr. Tompkins on to explain to those people how journalists are supposed to act, and unlike those people kissing Trump's butt, those guys are not journalists.
And Deb kept it short and sweet, writing, to me, a journalist informs, an influencer inflames. Lori called us saying there was one element of our segment yesterday she felt was missing. Let's listen.
Where you work, there's accountability. And influencers don't seem to have it. You can say anything online, and there doesn't seem to be accountability.
In our discussion about the rules and oversight that we face in this business, there's serious accountability for us. Not so much for those who post online, but we did get one email from a viewer who signed as a conservative American, writing, I wouldn't have invited your station to ICE. The bias I see every day is clear. There has not been anything positive on the big wins for all Americans that came from the new administration. Just once, I'd like to see a balance, not a bias. I think you do an excellent job. You probably don't have control because you work for someone who has their own liberal agenda. Okay, for what it's worth, we actually have a lot of control on this show. We have editorial discussions about these things because that kind of dialogue is important. And so is the dialogue that we have with you, viewers, because we'll say it time and time again, we read your emails and listen to all your voicemails, something a viewer named Fred really appreciates.
You are the only broadcast medium that I know of that lets the public have a voice, like me, in responding to the issues that you raise, including even issues that I've suggested that I'd like to see you raise. So kudos to the story.
Well, thanks for the message, Fred. And thanks to the rest of you for writing in or calling us. If we can't talk about the issues that we're facing or things that we disagree on, then we'll never find a solution. Okay, coming up next on the story, it's an announcement that's been lost in the shuffle of the news cycle here in the Portland area. But the state of Oregon recently sent out the maximum rent increase percentage for 2026. So if you rent, stick around. We'll explain what's different from previous years when the story returns. Okay, if you rent your home in the state of Oregon, listen up. In 2026, the most your landlord can raise your rent in most cases is 9.5%. That's the cap set by the state. It's the lowest increase since the law capping rent increases passed in 2019. But there are some changes to the law this year based on what kind of home you rent. For most homes more than 15 years old, as we said, the cap is 9.5%. It comes from adding the change in the cost of living over the past year plus 7%. So the maximum that number can be is 10%. But for manufactured homes and floating homes, the cap on rent increases is only 6%. If the property is more than 15 years old and if the space where you're renting, the manufactured home, park, or the marina, has more than 30 spaces. If it has 30 spaces or less, the rent cap is still 9.5%. The changes are due to House Bill 3054 that passed this past session. A lot of people own their manufactured homes, but not the land that it sits on. Many times that's rented from a mobile home park or a marina in the case of a floating home. House Bill 3054 was meant to protect them from big increases if they rent the lot their home is on. Here are some quick examples of what a 9.5% rent increase would look like. If you pay $1,700 a month in rent, the most your landlord can raise that next year would be an additional $161.50. For $2,000 rent, the max increase would be $190. And for $2,500, the most it could go up next year is $237.50. Okay, turning now to a little weather talk, as Chief Meteorologist Matt Safino published this story on KGW.com just a few days ago. La Nina and the blob could boost Oregon winter storms. Matt joins us now. Okay, Matt, help explain to us what you mean, because as you point out in the article, seasonal forecasting is far from an exact science.
Yeah, it's tricky, especially when you have two big things going at it like this, kind of like, if you will, Godzilla and King Kong. You never know which one's going to win, right?
Okay.
All right, so let's go through this a little bit too. We'll start with La Nina, and La Nina is really quite well understood, and we understand the implications that it typically has on weather in North America. So what is La Nina? La Nina is a change in the sea surface temperature patterns along the equatorial Pacific Ocean, and you can see it here. These are the sea surface temperatures of today. Do you see this kind of curly area of yellows? That's cooler than normal water extending from the coast of South America well into the Central Pacific. Classic signature of La Nina. What that does is it pushes more warm water farther west. That in turn changes where the heat and the moisture are added to the atmosphere in great quantities, and that changes the position of the jet stream, which is why it impacts our winter weather way up here in North America, even though that's happening thousands of miles away over the ocean. So that's La Nina. A little refresher on La Nina, cooler than normal ocean water in the central and eastern equatorial Pacific Ocean. Let's switch to the northern Pacific Ocean. And again, this is just sea surface temperatures, but look at all this warm water here, right? So let's look at the difference from normal. We call that an anomaly. What's the anomaly in our sea surface temperatures? Well, everywhere in yellow and orange is warmer than normal water. And look at this.
Wow.
It extends, right? It extends from the west coast here in North America clear over to Asia. That is the blob. Now, the difference between the blob and La Nina, even though they're both ocean conditions, is the blob basically forms because of the atmospheric conditions above it. So if we get high pressure and a lack of storms, you don't get upwelling of cooler water. You don't get mixing of the water from storms with the cooler water below. So the surface water just heats up, especially in summer. And that can have an impact on the weather and nearby land masses. For instance, we had several nights this summer, Blair, that were much warmer than normal. Our average overnight lows this summer were really very, very warm, and part of that may be because our ocean was warm. We also had a stretch of higher humidity days late in summer, also impacted by the warmer water here in the nearby ocean to the west coast, Oregon, California, and Washington, right? So what happens when you put these two together? How does that impact our winter weather? That's the big question, right? So first of all, let me talk about what it takes to destroy the blob, okay? What will kill the blob? Well, what will kill the blob are a lot of Pacific storms. And we begin to see that as we go into the fall season, more and more stormy weather across the Pacific Ocean. Here's one more quick look at the blob. This is Asia, this is North America, everywhere in yellow and orange, above average temperatures there. So that's just another way of looking.
Matt, I have to ask, why is it called the blob? Couldn't they come up with a better name?
I think it's kind of a great name.
You love it?
I kind of do.
Okay.
It's very descriptive, and it was named because oceanographers and meteorologists noticed this blob of really warm water out over the ocean, and it just sort of stuck.
Sure.
Yeah. Do you know about the La Nina naming? You know why it's called La Nina?
Remind me.
It's because the fishermen, this is like a couple hundred years ago, off of Peru and Ecuador, noticed that around Christmas time, the water became warmer than normal. That's the El Nino, okay, which is the opposite of La Nina. And when it got colder than normal, they said, well, let's call, and they named it El Nino because in Spanish, that's, you know, the boy or the Christ child. So they named the cool one La Nina, the counterpart of El Nino. So that's how that got its name. So back to the blob destroyers, right? What you need for that are storms to stir up the ocean. And this is from now through the next 10 days where you see the tight circles, concentric circles, that's where you have storms. Where you don't see that, where they're wide apart, that's high pressure. That's a blob maintainer like that. These are blob destroyers coming along these storms. And we see them ringing the Pacific Ocean, but never really cutting through the heart of the blob, which is not unusual because we usually do have high pressure over that part of the Pacific Ocean. But as we go deeper into winter, we would expect more storms, and there's one right there to help to churn the ocean. So I think the blob is more likely to get beaten back, if you will, than La Nina. So let's sum it up this way. First of all, typical La Nina weather pattern over the Pacific and North America, strong polar jet, strong Pacific jet, they come together right over us. So we usually get wet and stormy winters with a lot of variety in the Northwest, usually great for mountain snow. That's happening. So Sum it up this way: blob and La Nina. The blob may enhance La Nina because there's more warm water out there to feed the jet stream. On the other hand, La Nina could just destroy the blob with a lot of storms. Either way, and I favor La Nina over the blob, I think it's got more staying power, we're likely going to have a cool and wet winter with plenty of mountain snow. So there you go, food for thought.
Okay, Matt, thanks so much.
You bet.
We're back right after this. Well, that's the end of our show, folks. We'll see you tomorrow night.